The night the wind learned to whisper secrets, a stranger rode into a dust-worn town that did not like questions. The lamps along the boardwalk burned low, their light trembling as if afraid to be seen. Horses shifted in their stalls, leather creaked, and the smell of rain hung in the air, though no cloud dared to break. She had come from far beyond the dry bends of the river, carrying a small bundle and a past that clung like burrs. Folks watched from behind lace curtains and cracked doors, measuring her steps, counting her breaths. In places like this, every arrival meant trouble or mercy, and sometimes both wore the same coat. She found the room above the feed store because it was the only place with a door that closed and a window that did not rattle too loud. The floorboards sighed under her boots, and the walls held the marks of other lives that had passed through and never stayed. She set her bundle down and listened to the town settle. Somewhere a piano tried to remember a song. Somewhere else a man laughed too hard. She had crossed bad land and worse talk to reach this stop on the map, and still she did not know if she had come to hide or to be found. He was not meant to be there. That much was clear by the way he stood, quiet as a fence post, as if the room had grown around him. His hat lay on the table, worn thin at the brim. His coat carried the dust of many roads, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen storms and learned when to stand and when to step aside. He had a way of listening that made silence feel full. The town knew him by his work and left the rest alone. He kept to himself, fixed what was broken, and took payment in whatever a person could spare. He did not ask for names, and he did not offer his own. When the door shut, the sound landed heavy between them. She felt the weight of it settle in her chest. The room was small, the kind of space where every movement mattered. She had planned her words on the road, but plans often forgot themselves when faced with another human being. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the thought that this night might decide the shape of the rest of her life. The frontier had a way of doing that. It asked little and took much. She cleared her throat and spoke because silence had begun to bite. The question came out softer than she meant, shaped by long days of watching and waiting. She asked where she should undress. It was not a bold question. It was a careful one, carrying fear and hope in equal measure. In this Wild West story, such a question could ruin a woman or save her, depending on the answer and the man who gave it. He did not move at first. He looked at the window, then at the floor, as if weighing the room itself. Outside, the wind brushed the glass and a horse stamped once. His answer came slow, measured like a step across ice. He told her to sit. He told her she was safe. He told her that no one would touch her unless she wished it so. The words did not rise or fall. They stood firm. In a land where promises often broke before dawn, his answer sounded like a gate set deep in the ground. She felt something loosen that she had kept tied tight for years. The road had taught her to expect hands that grabbed and eyes that judged. She had learned to trade quiet for shelter and to keep her head down when men spoke. But his answer cut a clean line through that old learning. It did not offer charity or demand payment, it offered respect. In the American frontier, respect was rarer than rain. She sat because he had told her to sit. The chair creaked, and she pressed her palms together to keep them still. Her mind ran ahead, then back, then ahead again. She thought of the farm she had left, of the nights she had counted stars to keep from counting fear. She thought of the town she had fled, where whispers turned sharp and doors closed early. The West had promised distance, not peace. Yet here, in a room with peeling paint and a single lamp, peace hovered close enough to touch. He poured water into a tin cup and set it within her reach. His hands were steady. He did not crowd her. He did not look away in shame or stare in hunger. He spoke of the storm that might come by morning, of the work waiting at dawn, of the price of oats and the way the river had shifted its bank. Ordinary words, but they stitched the air back together. She drank and felt the water cool her throat. She breathed and felt the room expand. This was not a tale of sudden romance or easy rescue. It was a story about choice, about the moment when a woman learned she could choose more than survival. The Wild West often painted men as rough and women as fragile, but the truth lived in the quiet spaces between. The truth lived in answers given without force. As the lamp flickered, she understood that his answer had already changed her life, though she could not yet name how. Still, the night pressed on. The town did not sleep kindly, and danger did not always knock. A shout rose from the street, cut short by another voice. Footsteps passed, paused, then moved on. The frontier loved to test resolve. He listened, then rose and checked the lock. When he turned back, his eyes held a question he did not speak. He was a man shaped by loss and duty, and he knew better than to assume trust came easy. She met his gaze and felt a strength she had forgotten. She told him a piece of her story, not the whole thing, just enough to be true. She spoke of running, of being chased by talk that grew legs and teeth. She did not speak of the night that had started it all, not yet. Words like that needed daylight. He nodded and did not press. In the old American style, men learned that patience could be a form of courage. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet earth. The lamp hissed and the shadow on the wall changed shape. She stood, not because she was told, but because she wanted to stand. She smoothed her skirt and felt the steady beat of her heart. She asked again, softer now, as if testing the ground. His answer did not change. It held fast, like a promise meant to last through seasons. What neither of them could know was how that answer would echo beyond the room. The town would hear of it in time, because towns always do. Some would sneer, others would wonder. The West had room for all kinds of stories, and not all of them ended well. There were men who did not like boundaries and women who paid for daring to draw them. There were storms that washed away tracks and left nothing but questions behind. As the hour crept toward morning, the tension did not fade. It sharpened. Choices lay ahead like forked trails. Would she stay when daylight showed the truth of faces and fences? Would he keep his word when tested by hunger and rumor? The frontier did not reward kindness without cost. Somewhere beyond the hills, a rider spurred hard, carrying news that could turn mercy into danger. She looked at the door, then at the window, then back at him. The answer he had given still rang in her ears, steady and clear. It had opened a door she had not known existed. Yet doors once opened invite all manner of things to cross the threshold. As thunder rolled far off, the lamp burned low, and the night held its breath. The next step would decide everything, and neither of them knew which way the world would lean when dawn finally came. Dawn did not rush in. It crept, pale and careful, as if unsure it was welcome. The first light slipped through the thin curtain and laid a narrow path across the floor. Dust lifted and drifted in it, slow as thought. She watched the light move while the town held its breath. The night had passed without knocking, yet the danger felt no farther away. It waited, patient as a debt. He rose early, the way men did who learned to trust morning work more than sleep. He set the kettle on the small stove and listened for sounds below. Boots scraped on the boardwalk. A wagon rolled by, a voice called for bread. The day was waking, and with it came eyes and questions. He moved with care, as if the room were a promise that could break if handled rough. She wrapped her shawl tighter and felt the ache in her shoulders from too many nights on the road. The room smelled of coffee and iron. She wanted to ask him what he knew about the town, who held sway, who whispered and who listened. Instead, she asked about the weather, about the river, about the work he did when the sun stood high. Ordinary questions, safer than truth. He answered each without hurry, leaving space where answers ended. He did not ask her plans. He knew better than to corner a soul still learning it could stand. The kettle sang. He poured and set a cup before her. Steam curled, soft and alive. She took it in both hands and felt steadied. It struck her then how little kindness she had known that came without a price. The frontier taught lessons the hard way. Trust was a tool that broke easily. Yet here it sat between them, unclaimed, like a spare nail left on a bench. Below, the feed store opened. The bell rang once, sharp and bright. She flinched, then smiled at herself for it. He noticed and said nothing. His silence was not empty. It made room for her thoughts to settle. She told him about the farm near the cottonwoods, the one that had never been hers but had shaped her days. She spoke of seasons measured by frost and flood, of fences mended by lantern light. She did not say why she left. Not yet. He listened and nodded. He spoke of the work that brought him to this town, of a bridge that needed shoring before the spring melt. He mentioned a man who paid fare and another who did not. Names were avoided. In places like this, names traveled faster than facts. Outside, a rider passed slow, eyes lifting toward the window. She felt it like a tug. He stepped closer to the curtain and let it fall just so. By mid-morning, the town had found its stride. She stood at the window and watched women trade eggs for flour, watched men argue over a broken axle. Life went on because it always did. That was its mercy and its threat. He set tools into a worn satchel and paused, as if measuring the moment. He told her he would be back before dusk. He told her to bolt the door if anyone came calling. His voice held no command, only care. When he left, the room grew larger and lonelier. She moved through it, touching the table, the chair, the window latch. Each thing felt real. That mattered. She sat and sorted her bundle, laying out the few items she owned. A letter folded until it nearly vanished. A ribbon faded by sun. A small knife kept sharp. Each piece carried weight. She tucked them away again and waited. Time moved like thick syrup. Sounds drifted up from below, laughter, an argument, the thud of sacks. At noon, a shadow crossed the window and paused. Her heart jumped. The knock came light but certain. She did not answer. The shadow shifted. A voice spoke her description, careful and wrong in small ways. She held her breath. After a moment, the shadow moved on. The room felt colder. She knew then that the past had found the town. It always did. Trouble had a way of following those who tried to outrun it. She paced and thought of the rider she had seen at dawn, of the questions that would follow. She wondered if staying would put him at risk. She wondered if leaving would undo the gift he had given her. Choices weighed heavy, and the day was not done. Late afternoon brought clouds. The wind turned, carrying grit. She heard the first roll of thunder and felt it in her bones. He returned with mud on his boots and a cut on his knuckle. He washed it and shrugged off her concern. He said the bridge would hold for now. He said a man had been asking questions. He did not say which man. He watched her face as he spoke. She told him about the knock, about the voice that tried to fit her like a coat not meant for her shoulders. He listened, jaw tight. He did not scold. He did not offer to fight. He said the storm would make roads slow. He said sometimes weather did what kindness could not. The words were meant to comfort, but the tension did not ease. It sharpened like a blade honed on stone. As rain began, the town pulled inward, doors shut. Lamps lit, the wind rattled signs and sent dust to ground. They ate a simple meal and spoke little. Each sound carried meaning. Each pause held a question. She felt the weight of his earlier answer press against the moment, steady and unyielding. It had not changed, and that steadiness frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. She asked him why he stayed in places like this. He took a long moment. He said someone had to fix what broke. He said leaving was easy, staying took work. He said he had left once and learned the cost of it. The past flickered in his eyes, then went still. She did not press. Some truths needed time to surface. The storm grew. Thunder cracked close. Rain hammered the roof. The lamp guttered and steadied. Outside, a door slammed. A voice shouted a name that was not hers. Another voice answered sharp. She felt the room tighten around them. He stood and listened, hand resting near the door but not on it. He told her to sit again, gently, the same word as the night before. She did, trusting the sound of it. The knock came again, louder now, demanding. He moved to the door and spoke through it, calm and firm. He said the room was taken. He said business was done for the day. The voice outside laughed, ugly and sure. It said it would wait. The laughter faded into the rain. He bolted the door. They stood facing each other, the storm loud enough to hide their breathing. She felt the cliff edge beneath her feet. The answer he had given her still held, but the cost of it was rising. She saw it in his shoulders, in the way he weighed the lock. She wanted to tell him to let her go, to open the door and end it. The words caught in her throat. He met her eyes and shook his head, just once. No speeches, no hero talk. The frontier did not need that. It needed men who kept their word and women who learned they could ask for more than survival. Outside, the rain showed no sign of stopping. Inside, the tension coiled tighter, waiting for the moment when the storm would pass and the reckoning would begin. The rain worked its way into every crack of the town, softening dust into mud and turning voices low. The night stretched, long and uneasy. She sat near the table, hands folded, listening to the weather argue with the walls. He stayed close to the door, not guarding her so much as guarding the promise he had already made. In the Wild West, a promise could weigh as much as a rifle. Outside, footsteps passed and returned, slow and testing. She imagined eyes measuring the window, counting breaths. The man beyond the door did not knock again, but his presence lingered like smoke. It told her what she already knew. Running had only brought her to another edge. The frontier did not let a person vanish without effort. When the storm eased near midnight, the town did not sleep. Somewhere glass broke, somewhere a horse screamed. He opened the window just enough to listen, then closed it again. He said nothing, but his silence was full. She wondered what price he had paid before for standing firm, what scars lay hidden under his coat. She wondered if her past would become his burden. She spoke then, choosing truth over quiet. She told him about the night that had sent her running, careful with details but honest in shape. She told him about a lie that grew teeth, about a man who mistook power for right. She told him about the way a town could turn its back when fear wore a friendly face. Her voice did not break. She had spent too long holding it together to let it fail now. He listened, face set, eyes steady. When she finished, he said the West had a way of protecting the wrong people. He said it did not mean the wrong would win. He said storms changed the land, even when they left wreckage behind. The words were plain, but they landed with weight. She felt seen, not judged. Morning came thin and gray. The rain left behind a silence that felt louder than thunder. He went out early to check the street and came back with news that tightened the room. The man who had knocked was asking again. He had help now. 2 others watched corners and counted doors. The town pretended not to notice. That was how it survived. She paced and thought of the river road, of slipping out while eyes were elsewhere. He shook his head. The roads would be watched. Leaving now would invite a chase. Staying would invite a stand. Neither choice felt kind. The old American frontier loved to force such bargains. Down below, the feed store filled. Talk traveled. Some spoke of a woman hiding. Others spoke of trouble coming. A few spoke of fairness and were laughed down. She heard her description pass from mouth to mouth, changed just enough to sting. She pressed her palms together and breathed. A woman from the town climbed the stairs near noon, her steps careful. She brought bread and a look that held both worry and resolve. She said not everyone agreed with the men outside. She said some remembered favors paid long ago. She said doors might open if asked the right way. The visit warmed the room, then cooled it. Help was possible, but it came with risk. He thanked her and walked her down. When he returned, his face held a question. She understood. Accepting help would bind them to the town, to debts and expectations. Refusing would leave them alone against many. She thought of the life she wanted, small and honest, and chose neither answer yet. By afternoon, the men outside grew bold. They laughed in the street and spoke loud. They said the law would arrive soon, that order would be restored. She knew what kind of order they meant. He knew too. He checked the lock again and moved the table closer to the door, not as a barricade, but as a signal that the room would not yield easy. A boy ran past the window with a message folded tight. He stopped long enough to slip it under the door. It warned of a deputy on the way, one who owed favors to the loudest voice in town. The paper shook in her hand. The law could be a shield or a blade. On the frontier, it depended on who held it. As evening fell, the town gathered itself. Lamps flared. The air turned sharp. He spoke of a plan that did not solve anything, only delayed the worst of it. He would take her to a place by the river where the willows bent low. They could wait there until the night thinned. From there, roads split many ways. It was not safety, but it was movement. She nodded and packed light. Each sound outside felt closer. When they stepped into the stairwell, the boards groaned. A voice called out. He answered with calm that did not invite argument. They moved when the moment opened, slipping into the street as a wagon rattled past. The river smelled of wet stone and growth. The willows whispered. They crouched low and listened to the town argue with itself. Shouts rose and fell. A shot cracked the air, then another. She flinched and pressed closer to the earth. He stayed still, counting heartbeats. From their hiding place they saw the men spread out, angry and uncertain. One argued that waiting would bring the law on their side. Another wanted to end it now. Fear made them careless. She watched and learned how quickly confidence could sour. Time stretched again. She thought of the woman with bread, of the boy with the note, of all the quiet courage that lived between headlines. She thought of the answer he had given her that first night and how it had already asked so much of him. She wondered if the West would ever allow such answers to stand. A figure approached the riverbank, moving alone. He tensed. The figure stopped and whispered a warning. The deputy had arrived early. The town was split. Some doors would open. Others would not. The message hung between them, heavy with choice. They stayed hidden as the night deepened. The river moved on, patient and strong. She felt the old fear stir, then settle. Whatever came next would test every promise made in that small room above the feed store. The conflict had spread beyond them now, touching the town, the law, the land itself. As distant voices rose and the sound of boots drew near, she took his hand without asking. He squeezed once, a silent vow. The frontier waited, sharp and watching, and the answer that had begun it all stood ready to be challenged again before dawn. The river kept its counsel as the night wore on. Water slid over stone with a sound that steadied her breathing. They stayed low beneath the willows, hands linked, listening as the town searched for itself. Lantern light moved along the far bank. Voices called out, sharp with impatience. The men were no longer laughing. Fear had thinned their bravado, leaving edges exposed. He shifted closer and whispered that dawn would change everything. Light always did. It showed who stood where and why. Until then, the dark belonged to whoever understood it best. She nodded and watched the clouds part just enough to show a scatter of stars. She felt small beneath them, and strong too. The frontier taught both lessons at once. A pair of boots splashed near the water. She froze. He held still, a steady presence. The boots paused, then moved on, the owner distracted by a shout from the street. Somewhere a door slammed. Somewhere a voice argued for patience. The deputy's arrival had cracked the town open. Old loyalties were being counted. They waited until the voices drifted away, then crept along the river's edge. Mud sucked at their boots. Branches brushed their coats. The night smelled clean after the storm. He led with care, choosing ground that would not betray them. She followed and trusted the way she had not trusted anyone in years. Near the bend, a shape rose from the reeds. She tensed, then relaxed when she recognized the woman who had brought bread. The woman's face was pale but set. She said the deputy was listening to everyone, not just the loudest men. She said the town council had gathered without calling it such. She said there was talk of standing against the trouble rather than feeding it. Hope, fragile and bright, flickered. They shared quick words and parted. The woman melted back toward the lights. He and she crossed to the far bank where the path narrowed and split. The plan was not a plan so much as a series of chances. Take one, then another, and trust the land to meet them halfway. The deputy's voice carried across the water, measured and calm. He was asking for facts, not stories. That alone was a crack in the wall. The men who hunted her answered too quickly, their words tripping over each other. She watched shadows shift and felt the balance tilt. The West could be cruel, but it was not blind. They moved again, closer now to the edge of town. The feed store bell rang once, then went still. Someone had cut the rope. A lamp guttered and died. Darkness gathered in pockets. He paused and listened, then guided her toward a stand of cottonwoods. The trees held the night like a held breath. A figure stepped into their path, hands open. It was the boy, eyes wide but steady. He said the deputy wanted to hear from her, not to corner her, but to end the noise before it turned worse. He said there were others willing to stand nearby. The words carried risk, but also a door. She felt the old urge to run, sharp and insistent. Then she remembered the answer that had started all this, the way it had made space where none existed. Running had kept her alive. Standing might give her a life. She looked at him. He did not push. He did not pull. He waited. They followed the boy through a back lane to a yard lit by 2 lamps and the moon. The deputy stood there, hat in hand, posture easy. He spoke plain and asked plain questions. She answered with the truth she could give, careful and clear. She spoke of leaving, of lies, of fear made loud by men who needed it to be so. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She told her story and let it stand. The men who had chased her interrupted, voices rising. The deputy raised a hand and quiet fell. He asked for proof. They had none that held up to daylight. He asked for witnesses. One step forward, then another. The woman with bread, the boy. A shopkeeper who had heard threats spoken as jokes. The town leaned in, listening to itself. Tension tightened the air. The men glared and shifted. One spat and turned away. Another stayed, jaw set, calculating. The deputy said there would be no dragging anyone from rooms tonight. He said the law would not be a tool for settling grudges. He said those who wished to press claims could do so proper and clean. The words were a line drawn in dirt and stone. Still, nothing was finished. The men could wait. They could follow. The road beyond town was long and thin. He knew it. She knew it. The deputy knew it too. He said he would ride escort at first light as far as the next crossing. He said the town would watch itself until then. It was not justice, not yet. It was space. The men melted back into the dark, anger smoldering. The yard exhaled. She felt her knees weaken and caught herself. He was there, steady as ever. The deputy nodded to him, a look of respect passing between them. The West recognized its own sometimes. They did not return to the room above the feed store. Too many eyes. They waited in the yard, near the cottonwoods, where dawn would find them together. The sky lightened at the edges. Birds tested the air. She leaned against him and felt the future press close, not gentle, but possible. As the first pale light touched the town, she thought of all that had led here, the question asked in fear. The answer given without demand. The storm that had tried to break them. The town that had almost failed and then did not. The conflict was not done. It had only gathered itself for the last push. Boots sounded on the road. Horses snorted. The deputy mounted. The men who wished them ill watched from doorways, measuring again. The West did not give happy endings freely. It tested them first, to see if they would hold. She took a breath and squared her shoulders. Whatever waited beyond the crossing would meet her standing, not running. He met her eyes and nodded. The road stretched ahead, brightening by the minute. The moment before movement held everything at once, fear and hope bound tight, as the story leaned forward toward its breaking point. The horses stepped out at first light, hooves soft on the damp road. The deputy rode ahead, posture easy but watchful, while the town watched from doorways and windows. No one cheered. No one jeered. The West did not make a show of mercy. It let it pass and remembered. She looked back once and saw the woman with bread lift a hand. The boy stood near the feed store, chin high. The men who had hunted her stayed where they were, faces hard, plans unfinished. The road bent toward the crossing, following the river's patient curve. Sunlight found the water and broke into pieces. With every mile, the town's pull weakened. The deputy asked a few final questions, careful and fair, and wrote notes that would travel farther than rumor. He said there would be inquiries in the places that mattered. He said lies often collapsed when faced with steady truth. It was not a promise of victory, but it was a path. At the crossing, the deputy reined in. He tipped his hat and said this was as far as he would go. He pointed toward a trail that climbed into higher ground where farms leaned on one another and neighbors watched the road. He said a man he trusted worked there, a bridge builder who needed hands and paid honest. He wished them well and turned back, the sound of his horse fading into morning. They crossed the river slow, water cold around the ankles. She felt the weight of the past lift with each step. On the far bank she laughed once, surprised by the sound of it. He smiled, a small thing that carried far. The land rose gently, green after rain. Birds moved through cottonwood shade. The frontier did not soften, but it offered room. Days followed with work and watchfulness. They reached the farms by dusk and were taken in without fuss. The bridge builder listened, asked what mattered, and put them to work. She learned the rhythm of the place, the way morning light hit the fields, the way neighbors looked out for one another without speeches. He worked wood and iron, steady and skilled. The promise he had made did not waver. It did not need to be spoken again. Word traveled, as it always did. Some carried old poison, others brought truth. A letter arrived weeks later, sealed and official. It said the lies had been named and found wanting. It said the men who had chased her were warned and watched. It said the law would remember. She read it twice and set it down with a breath that felt like a beginning. They built a small place near the willows where the river widened and slowed. It was nothing grand, just a roof that kept rain honest and a door that closed when needed. She chose where things went. He respected that choice. When storms came, they weathered them together. When quiet settled, they learned its shape. The question that had started it all returned sometimes in memory, softened now. She understood what it had truly asked and what his answer had truly given. Not rescue, not control, but space and dignity. In the Wild West, those were acts of courage. One evening, as the sun slid low and the water caught fire, she stood at the door and watched him mend a rail. He looked up and met her gaze. No words were needed. The road behind them had been hard, but it had led here. The frontier stretched on, wide and demanding, yet for the first time it felt like a place she could belong. She thought of the town that had almost broken her and the people who had not let it. She thought of the deputy's calm voice and the woman's bread and the boy's brave feet. The West was made of such moments, strung together by those willing to stand. When night fell, the river kept its song. The lamp burned steady. She closed the door and felt safe without feeling small. The story did not end with a shout or a chase. It ended with work, with trust earned and kept, with a future chosen. In a land that often took, they had claimed something lasting.